Welcome back to another episode of Life's Ambition podcast. Today we are joined by a revolutionary of our time. He's going to give insight on his adventures to becoming the CIO of NATO. If you like the episode, please give the podcast a like or 5-star rating, depending on what platform you are listening to. Without further ado, Manfred Boudreaux-Dehmer. Manfred, how we doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Drew?
I'm doing great. I see that you're still in Brussels right now.
Yes. I've got the NATO flag behind me, so I'm in my office at NATO in Brussels, and it's good.
Very cool. Well, I know you were in Vegas not too long ago. Was that also NATO, like I would say, I guess work related?
It was work related, so I was at the Oracle Cloud Conference in Las Vegas,
Oh,
but then let's see, since then I went, so I came back from Vegas and then I went back to the US for essentially a day. And then I came back here and went to Helsinki and then I went to Amsterdam and I'm getting ready to go on to another trip actually to North Carolina to speak at Duke University. So it's
whoa.
lots and lots of travel that's going on these days. So this is a very busy period.
Why is it so busy? Is it this usually always happen where you'll
Mm,
travel a lot, or is it during the presidential cycle for the United States?
No, so it's not really influenced by the election in the US. I think the biggest influence is we have two really busy times throughout the year. One is as it gets closer towards the end of the year because many organizations you want to have stuff completed that year, right? So there's
Yeah.
deadlines, there's things like that. So that's what makes it really busy towards that. We also have an annual NATO summit where all of the heads of states come together of our member nations, and that's in the summer. And so there's this period in kind of in spring leading up towards the summer that's also very, very busy. So it's these two peak periods, and we're just now in the one before year end where everything just has to get done.
Well, and not to totally sidetrack, but you brought up Duke University. I know it was a little bit ago, but you graduated from there with your MBA program, correct?
Yes,
And then
exactly.
before
So
then, you were in Germany and had schooling there, but you were in apprenticeship, correct?
yes, but there was like 30 years or so in between, right? So to just kind of talk about schooling a bit. So yes, I was born and raised in Germany and I went to school there, but I was not, shall we say, very focused in my younger years on school and on academic achievements. And so I kind of did the basic minimum schooling that I could get away with in Germany. And so I did that, and then I did what was called an apprenticeship. And an apprenticeship is quite often done in trade jobs where you would, learn a craft, like how to become a carpenter or something like that. But there was also this discipline called an accounting clerk. And so you would learn typing and easy bookkeeping items and, a few things to do in the office. And so I got an apprenticeship to become an accounting clerk. And that's all happened in Germany. But then from there, I started working as in computers and as a computer programmer. But I've always gotten away with this very, very basic level of schooling that I got. And then it was much, much, much later when I was in my early 40s that I decided I will not leave this world without having a college degree. And so I'd always wanted to go to Duke University and targeted that school and had to convince them that they would actually admit me to the MBA program without an undergraduate degree. And
That's
based
crazy.
on all of the practical experience and the business experience that I had by that time, they said yes. And so I was able to do the MBA at Duke, which is now exactly 10 years ago, because I just went back this past April for my 10th anniversary of the MBA.
Very exciting, very exciting. I guess for me, when I think about someone that has not taken the traditional route, quote unquote, where here you're 18, you look for colleges, you apply for colleges, boom, you go get your undergrad, whether you get your master's, doctorate thereafter, then you get a job, you work, whatever. But you started as an apprenticeship and you worked as for a clerk, and you said that you kind of slacked off a little bit during your younger years. Now, did that sway you from going to I would say college, or was that just always the route you kind of want to take? Was there any influence in becoming a clerk? Kind of take me, why did you go the technological route?
Well, I mean, it just kind of happened. So hats off to everyone. Earlier you mentioned, the traditional route would be you graduate, from high school, and then you go to college, and then you would go on, maybe to a master's and a doctorate. I have the highest admiration of everyone who has such a plan and such an ambition, especially at an early point in life. And I think that's great. I just didn't have that. I was just not very focused when I was young. I think that's the only way I can explain it. I grew up in a small village in Bavaria, and I didn't really feel I was fitting in. So I came out. I was this gay boy growing up in a Bavarian village with more cows than people. So I think that affected a bit my kind of the ambition that I had, and also academically as to what I wanted to do. And it kind of all fell into place, that I then had this opportunity to start working for this company and do this apprenticeship. And then, more by accident, I slid into an IT job, because at that time there was a lot of demand for IT people, and the company was willing to train me. And so I started as a data entry clerk, and then as a computer operator, which means that you would change tape backup reels and put paper into the printer. It kind of shows you how long ago that was, right? So there was, everything had to be printed out, and you had like big backups with tape. And so I did that. And then the company sent me on computer training courses. And so I learned a couple of archaic languages that I doubt anyone would still remember who's listening to this podcast. But I kind of slid into IT. And from there, I then changed companies, and I started working for Compaq Computers in Munich, a US
Yeah.
computer company at that time. And that's when things really took off, where I got into a real IT job, and then PCs and laptops came along later. And so I grew with the company, transferred with them to the US. I was with them in Houston. Then Compaq merged with HP, with Hewlett Packard. So that's how I got to Hewlett Packard. So I stayed with this company, combined Compaq and HP, for 20 years. And then, I changed jobs again to work for a Canadian technology company in Vancouver. So it sounds like it's this very predefined, very well laid out plan, and it wasn't. A lot of it was just kind of, you work hard, you slide into something, and there's, when opportunity meets talent, that I was then able to get the experience. That's when things worked, and they kind of took off.
Well, I remember you telling me a pretty funny story when you were applying for Compact, that you only knew so much English before you started, so you had someone else kind of help you out with
Yes.
writing the proposal.
Yes, yes. So the funny thing about the job advertisement at Compaq was that I had pretty much none of the required and none of the desired attributes for the job that was in the posting. But I had a lot of self-confidence, and I decided I'm going to apply. I really want to work for Compaq. It's at that company, at that point in time, it's like an American computer manufacturer, and I was like totally excited about working for them. They also needed perfect English. Now, I had basic English in school. It was far from perfect. So I actually had someone help me translate the resume and write the cover letter that I then sent in. And I was invited for the interview, and it became apparent quite quickly that my English was not at the level that it should be, but I could convince people that, you give me this chance and I will work really hard. And within a few months, I will speak English. I will apply myself. You just have to give me the chance. And then when I got the job, I had some time left before starting, and I took all of my vacation in the old company, and I went to New York for a few months, and I went to an English school there, and I lived with a host family, and I really, then studied English so I could even start working in that job. And I guess that's one big lesson that I'd like to give everyone. It's like, if you look at job ads online and you're not having all of the required attributes that are in the job, don't be discouraged. apply and see what happens. The fact that you have a little bit of maybe not full experience in one of the areas that they're asking for, do not let yourself get discouraged. Go ahead, apply, and go in with an attitude that I can do this. And if the potential employer picks up on your positivity and your ambition and the fact that you really want to do this, there's a lot that can come out of that.
I remember when I was applying for the company I work with right now, they talked a lot about different technological aspects that I never studied in school, whether that was Power BI, Tableau. I had some coding experience in Python, but they talked a lot about how I might need to know R. And what I did going into those interview process, like, all right, I'm just gonna look up what are they. I don't have experience in them, but I'm gonna look up what are they. And they did ask me questions like, hey, like, do you have any experience? I said no, but I know that these are data analytical tools that people will use to like display information. And
Yes.
like that's great that you can mention that. So even when you break it down to that sense of, okay, can I at least know what they're talking about and showing a willingness to learn to go
Yeah.
those next steps? And I think for you, when you said that you were living with pretty much a billet family in New York and trying to learn English and do all that stuff, obviously, I think learning a language is astronomically harder than maybe learning Power BI or Tableau.
Hmm.
But it kind of goes into similar concepts. Like if you can apply yourself in a sense, then you can kind of keep going from there and hope
Yes.
for the best.
Yes, and I think it's really important in interviews or in the application process. So I think rule number one: don't lie. I mean, don't say things that are not true. But if if you think you're there or you're mostly there, but not all the way, be honest and basically say, I'm willing to work for this. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to
Hmm.
get myself in there, hang in there. And then this confidence and this ambition and the fact that you're really trying, that will, I think, carry a lot with a lot of hiring managers, where you may be surprised as to who gets the job in the end. It might not be the one who ticks all the boxes on the required and desired attributes, but it might be the one who, with attitude and willingness to learn and some drive, will in the end do a much better job.
100%. How much would you say confidence has gotten you to the place where you are today, now as the CIO of NATO?
It's hard to determine. So the element of confidence, I've always had, I think, a lot of confidence in terms of I can do this. I'll just wing it and see what happens. I've always had that. But then there is knowledge and there is skills and there is experience and there is always an element of luck. Let's not forget that. A
Hmm.
lot of times, whether your resume makes it to the top or not, or it gets picked, or it always also depends a bit on your competition, right? Especially if you look for a job, like who else's resume is in that stack. It's kind of like the year when you want to win an Oscar and there's a blockbuster movie that cleans up all of the Oscars, then it's harder than if it's a different year. So I think it's a combination of all of this, but I'm a firm believer in advertise what you know, what you can do. Be confident in yourself, grow your skills, and try things out. Just experiment a bit, and sometimes jump. It's a leap of faith, right?
Yeah,
To do something, and I think that attitude is picked up by people around you, and that they will see you in a positive light, or in a light where they then may give you a chance, right? And say, okay, let's see if you really can jump, he or she.
hmm.
And I think it's a good way of approaching this.
Oh, 100%. And I also think it's kind of funny now because a lot of people, what they'll do to get their resume to get a bump up is they'll actually take the entire description of the job. And I know a few people have done this before. They'll take the description of the job, they'll minimize it into their resume, and the AI engine that companies will use, it'll actually pick it up. They put it all in white so you can't see it on the resume itself. They'll minimize it, and it'll pick up by the AI engine. So then
Mm.
it bumps them up to that second round. I'm like, that's such a creative idea.
It's very
But
creative. I think I just learned something new as to how this
oh,
works.
there you go.
Um, yeah, and yeah, I mean, back in the days when I applied for jobs, it was a bit different. But you're right. I mean, now it's a lot of AI is looking through the application and already makes a predetermination.
Hmm.
Does the computer put you on the yes pile or the no or the maybe? And so I think there are some things that you can do, because the first hurdle is really that not a human. The first hurdle is a machine that you would have to convince.
100%, 100%. And sidetracking from there, how was your experience coming from Germany over? Like, did you find a difference when you were working as a clerk to starting at Compaq in Munich, and then when you came over to the States, when you were in New York, and then you were in Texas? Did you find that organizations work differently depending on where you were, or kind of describe a little bit of that?
Yes, big difference. So I worked for Compaq in Germany for a couple of years, and then I transferred with them to the Netherlands for a brief assignment. It was about half a year. And then
Hmm.
from there, I went with Compaq to Houston. So Compaq as one company, there were some similarities, of course, between the Munich location and then the Netherlands and then Houston. But I also worked for Compaq Latin America in Houston. So when I joined the Latin American division, which was its own subsidiary of Compaq. And there was a lot of people from Latin America in working for the company. We were, I think, about 100 employees. So it was almost like a small startup within a large computer company, Compaq, but focused on the Latin American market and breaking into the market, setting up a factory in Brazil and selling into this market. So it had some special parts to it that were different from the kind of the larger company, because it was really created as a separate entity, and it had an entrepreneurial spirit in it and a mindset that was pretty much a culture that was pretty much propagated by the CEO of the company, who was a gentleman from Colombia. And there was some cultural things in there, right? So meetings would typically not start on time, and if you came to the office at 8 in the morning, there was the cleaning crew was there, but nobody else was there. It had funny things where it was an environment that was in Houston, but it was really quite a Colombian or Mexican company, because that's where the majority of the people were from.
Hmm. And what exactly did you do there?
So when I was supporting a system, which was kind of a custom built demand supply management system, so kind of in the supply chain area in Munich. And then Compaq Latin America was interested in having that system be implemented for them. And so I was the specialist, because I'd worked for a couple of years with that system in Munich. And then I'd gone to the Netherlands to implement it there at a distribution center that we had there. And so that's how I went to Compaq Latin America. They wanted to run this system internally for their business, and I was the guy who had done this for a number of years in Europe. And that's how I came over. And first it was a temporary assignment for a few months, and then they liked what I did, and then they're like, oh, you should stay. And so this idea of moving at age 25
Wow.
from Germany to the US, where I didn't really know anyone. I mean, I knew some coworkers that I had gotten to know a bit over time, but it was a big deal for me, and it was a very liberating, freeing experience, because earlier I mentioned I was kind of this in this small Bavarian village, and I grew up
Hmm.
there and kind of didn't really fit in. And then suddenly you are in the fourth largest city of the US, in Houston, and I had my apartment, and I got myself a convertible sports car. I mean, I was just living it up. It was absolutely great. I had a wonderful time, and I immediately loved Houston, because it's really a great city. People are very, very nice. It has low cost of living. The weather is good if you like heat and humidity, which I do. So I had a
Amazing.
great time.
Well, that's awesome because you also bring up an interesting point there as well when you talk about how after a few years with working with the system, you got to develop your own in Netherlands and help out there, and then you really got to develop it in the Latin American division in Houston. Did you find that because of your knowledge and the steps you took in Munich, that kind of helped get you to where you were in Houston.
Yeah, yeah, it all builds upon each other. I mean, every experience that you're able to put under your belt, every skill that you learn, it is really it's a stone. It's a stone within a building, right? And so you could consistently build things up.
Hey, did people come up to you and were like, "Hey, this is the person you want to talk to in regarding to this"?
Yeah, I mean, specifically when it came to the system that I supported, I was like the specialist because I've just supported the system and then knew all of its in and outs, right? And I
Mhm.
was part of the development team that put it together. So there was a lot of expertise there that was sought by people. And then I also knew Compaq kind of in its larger thing a bit because I'd already been there for 2 years. And so a lot of people were new in the Latin American division because they had just started it up. So that is again some experience where I knew the company or another part of the company quite well. Also, the requirement was to be fluent in Spanish, which I was not. So I kind of did a repeat because then I went off to Mexico to a language school there, and I was with a host family in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and then I went to Spanish, took Spanish courses there, and then I came back and did quite a bit of work in Spanish, and now I still benefit from it when we go to Mexico on vacation, which we do frequently.
That's
I
awesome.
can still use my Spanish that I learned at Latin America, but it's kind of one stone builds upon the other one, right? And it's something after you've learned something and you've internalized it and you've kind of you're able to do it, that is a feather in your cap that you can keep, right? And that's what you take to the next job and the next and the next. It's all cumulative.
Yeah, well, what made you change from Compact over to HP? Well, you said HP acquired Compact, right?
Yes, that was not really kind of a choice. So I was happy, Compact Latin America. I was there for 9 years until the merger happened. So I was there from
Hmm.
'93 to 2000, and I had increasingly more responsibilities, right? So I was doing supply chain systems, but then I was doing an ERP implementation and other systems. So it was always kind of my responsibilities grew and the team got bigger. And then I was responsible for factory systems at this manufacturing in Brazil. And I spent quite a bit of time in Brazil. I had a second office there for some time and really worked very closely with the team there. And then the merger happened with HP, and that's how I came to HP. And then I completely changed what I was doing inside of HP. It was at that time data, now we call it data analysis or data sciences. It's really take a lot of dispersed base data and kind of make sense out of it for a business. Back then, we called it data warehousing. And so I changed jobs and I built up a data warehousing group that we needed very, very urgently because we now had these two companies, right? There was the pre-merger Compaq and then the pre-merger HP. And it was imperative to put data together where you could really look at the company through one lens, right? So we had a lot of different systems running and we put a big database together in essence, put all of the data in there for orders, for invoices, for inventory that we had, for all of this stuff. And that took a couple of years. And so it was a very, very different, very new technology, very different field of working in.
Well, and because HP was bigger, did you have to compete again for a position? Or how did the merger work, I guess? Because when I think about it, I'm like, okay, HP probably has the same people that Compact has doing the same exact thing.
Yeah,
So,
it was a tough thing because it's exactly as you said, right? So the idea was very often the acquiring company kind of is, people there are in a better position from the company that's being acquired. HP did a really good job in blending the two companies and the two cultures. So the idea was really to form a purple team, as we called it. So the Compact logo and the Compact color was red, and the HP logo and HP color is blue, and so the red and the blue would create a purple. So we really wanted to create a purple company with the teams being stacked from the two different pre-merger companies so that it's really an integrated unit. But in the wake of that, and that's really one of the sad parts about mergers or acquisitions, is there's always efficiencies that shareholders are looking for, and efficiencies is really code for letting people go. And
Wow.
yes, you had to absolutely compete again for the job that you would be the one who does data warehousing, right, for this combined company. So yeah, there was competition in that. And then kind of the path continued where I did that for a couple of years and then moved to kind of a higher level strategy and planning position for data warehousing. At that time, we then called it business intelligence. That was kind of its new name. And then from there, I did supply chain strategy and planning. And then my last job at HP was the area of HP IT that did offshore development and support work. So in other words, work that was done for HP in India, China, Malaysia, and then more closely to the US in Mexico and in Costa Rica. And so I did that for the last 4 years that I was at the company.
Holy cow. And then this was right before you decided to go to university, right?
Almost. So that was we've now made it to 2010, and in 2010 I decided I want to do something different. I HP was very very big. I had been with this combined HP and Compaq company for 20 years, and I wanted to do something different. And so I looked for smaller companies that had were in kind of interesting locations and that needed a head of IT. And that's how I found Sierra Wireless. And Sierra Wireless is a Canadian technology company. They've in the meantime also been acquired by another company, but at that time they were front and center for like wireless technologies, Internet of Things, which is another, particular devices and technological concepts. So I ran their IT department for 11 years, and we relocated to Vancouver, Canada, which was a fantastic city as well. And so I did that until I then started at NATO, which was 3 years ago.
That's crazy to think about. And I did have a real quick question. When we think about HP now and how ChatGPT and Copilot and all these different programs are coming out, how do you think AI is changing the way different technological companies will do something?
Oh, that's a big question. And it's not only technology companies. I think artificial intelligence and ChatGPT or ChatGPT like applications will change things in a major way, but not yet. I think there's a lot of hype about it, and just
Hmm.
about was very recently that ChatGPT came out, and we've all have used it and have potentially our Christmas cards written by it, or just we all play with it and use it. But if you think about it, human creativity and intellectual ownership of new ideas and things that are meaningful that combine seemingly unrelated things, that is a human skill, and that can currently not be supplanted by ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a probability engine. You start out with one word, and it has the probability for the next word and the next word and the next word to follow. So it can do some very impressive things, but it cannot think, and it cannot apply a level of ingenuity and creativity that is really a prerogative of humans. Now, at some point in the future, this may change, but I think for now we're giving it a little too much credence than what it really deserves. But yeah, that's just a little side comment there on ChatGPT or Copilot.
Yeah, now for at NATO, are you guys seeing any applications that you're using with it right now?
We are. We're kind of starting out with it. So we run a couple of pilots. So one pilot is actually really interesting. So NATO is an organization that operates in two languages. So we've got two official languages, and it's English and French. That means that every official document and every meeting as well that we have, every official meeting, there need to be interpreters there who translate everything from one language to the other, right? So we've got English, French, and French to English. Specifically for the written policies and documents that we have. We're running a pilot for with artificial intelligence to the translation, and
Huh.
then have our translators who would ordinarily have done that really focus on nuances of language and the fact that the target document then really explains what the source document intends to say. So we've used that as a productivity helper for translators. It's an interesting use case. We're doing quite a bit with artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So I'm the NATO CIO, but then my second leg that I stand on is to be responsible for cybersecurity at the NATO enterprise, which is not the countries, but it's basically the NATO headquarters and various other entities that is kind of the inner ring of NATO. And so for cybersecurity, there are some very interesting use cases that we look into, because there you need to be aware of a million different things that are happening in your network. And for humans to do this analysis is really, really hard, because we just don't do very well as humans with massive amounts of data and plowing through it. And it's also not the best way how we should spend our time and our creative energy. And that's where artificial intelligence helps. And it is able to detect patterns that are really not visible to the human eye. And then once a pattern is detected with stuff that goes on in the systems and in the network, humans can look at it and can then see, oh, wait a minute, this is something that's maybe expected or something that's not expected.
Well, when you're in an international organization over 32 nations, I'm sure you're going to want an engine or something that can process a ton of data that you guys are collecting. And for you, when you talk about how you want to prioritize other things, what would those other things be? Because obviously cybersecurity is huge when you're dealing with so many different people, different things that can happen. Like, what would you what are you saying in prioritizing?
So we spend a lot of our time on thinking is just how to continuously modernize our systems. So a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are going through a digital transformation phase of really re-envisioning the business as to how would that look like with a major technology booster. How do you apply technology strategically to move your business forward? So our business is deterrence and defense. That's what NATO does. So we're an alliance of 32 nations, as you said, and the 32 nations put their defense capabilities, but also their political capabilities together to be a force to reckon with, right? And that really feeds into the deterrence part of NATO. So the fact that we have the military part of it, right, and that the 32 countries put all of their capabilities together means that we have more power together. And that is deterring adversaries or competitors or potential adversaries, right? And so if we look towards the east, we all know what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine. And I think that is, NATO has had a bit of I would say, a renaissance in the past few years. I think people have more appreciated the importance that this defensive alliance has. And so for us, we need to be sure that our systems are in a state where they can be absolutely used anytime to defend the alliance and to make sure that we can perform our business. So there's a digital transformation component that comes with it. And that's what we're focusing on as well. So we need to be essentially better, have more data integration, more seamless connectivity between nations and us, the ability to talk to each other very quickly, also in adverse situations. If there is, if a network is down, if a building is not available. So we do a lot of testing and building out our communications network, because communication is at the source of everything that we do.
Well, and how do you communicate on that scale? Like, what do you guys specifically use? Because you could be in Vegas, someone else could be in Brussels right now, or you could be in Brussels, someone could be from the States, someone could be France, anywhere.
So we use a number of communication equipment. So I'm going to be deliberately vague as to what we do. So
Because I'm sure
we,
some stuff
in
is
terms of,
classified.
well, in terms of the technical capabilities, right?
Yeah.
But we have different networks that we use, and also there's different classification levels of conversations or different classification levels of data, right? We are pretty we're very good in dividing data into what is unclassified, like what is fine, right? And then we have a higher level of confidentiality, and then we have like secret data, and so we make a distinction based on the kind of the importance for particular data or conversations that we give for confidentiality, right? Which
Hmm.
is obvious in our business, and so we've got a couple of different sophisticated systems and network in place where we can communicate from locations through a cell phone, as you say, if somebody's in Vegas and wants to talk to someone in Brussels. But then we also have really protected systems in place where nations could talk to each other, could talk to the NATO headquarters, or the NATO military arm could talk to the headquarters. So those are sophisticated encrypted systems, of course, that are complicated to build out and to
Yeah.
continuously maintain and make sure that they are in a state where they're usable at all times and in any condition.
And when you talk about the data integration, like boosting it up, is that what you are in charge of? Is helping get that free flow of communication, how to, let's just say, develop these technologies to encrypt it, especially as a CIO, or are you delegating out like, hey, this is kind of my vision for it. This is what I'd love to do. Can
Mm.
we accomplish it?
There's a number of different players in it. So, from a policy perspective as to what we should do, the ultimate governance of us is the nations. So
Hmm.
we have a number of committees that deal with different things. So we've got in kind of an IT committee, we call it the Digital Policy Committee. We've got a cyber defense committee, we've got a security committee, we've got different committees that deal with finance stuff, like a budget committee or an investment committee. And so all of the 32 nations are in each one of the committees. And the ultimate approval authority of really everything that we do, because we are created to serve as a headquarters to serve the 32 nations. So the 32 are going to approve what we do. But of course, I make suggestions, I advise, I give things, but I do have a steering board, as it would be called in in another company, that is a national board where the nations are making the final decision. Now, what should be done or the how from a technical perspective? So I weigh in a lot into that as far as the technical direction is concerned. But
Hmm.
then NATO also has a service agency that is doing the hands to keyboard of technical specialists. That is not part of my office, but it's a different NATO agency that we work together very closely to make sure that they do what needs to be done in terms of architectural choices, technology choices, and so on. So there are a number of different players in it, all the way from like nations to hands-on keyboard to people who do enterprise architecture and set policies.
Huh. And for you, with everything that's been going on, and your switch from growing up in Munich, coming over here, and then working your way into a lot of private industries, what is it like working for an international government agency?
Oh, that's a great question. That might take us the rest of the time, but let me just see. What is it that I want to touch upon? Private industry and government and academia also. Those are three very different animals. And I've been able to smell a little bit of academia with doing my PhD and kind of working with professors and kind of seeing what is important to them and how academic writing takes place and arguments are being formed. And so in the private industry, where I worked before, it is speed is of the essence because you always want to run just a little bit faster than your competitor. Otherwise, you're losing market share
Hmm.
or worse. And so there is an incredible focus on speed, on efficiency, on having your costs under control, thinking of new products or services, introducing them to the market, widening your market, getting into other market segments, doing kind of vertical integrations across the supply chain. I mean, there's certain things that we always obsessed over when I was in a private industry, and I also always worked for publicly traded companies. So that means that you need to answer to the investors in the stock market. And that automatically gives it a pretty short-term focus because it's all about the current quarter. And then it's all about guidance for the next quarter. So you're on a quarterly timetable, and that is bleeding into a lot of the decisions that are made in publicly traded companies. Now, NATO is very different. We do things much more slowly. We operate on a consensus-based principles. And so that's also an interesting thing. Those boards or committees that I mentioned earlier, where the 32 nations are on, a decision only sticks if it is made by consensus. So all 32 need to say yes. If 31 says yes and one says no, it is a no. So it is. We're not like the United Nations where you've got yes votes and no votes and abstentions. That's not the case. A NATO decision is made at 32, as we say, and only when all 32 sign on to it is it a decision. That has a great advantage that when NATO decides to do something, it really has decided. The alliance has decided to do something. So it's not some nations do it or some don't. It really is a cohesive product that comes out of it, and that is very, very valuable. On the other side, it takes long to get there. As you can, if you want to go on a family trip with 31 of your cousins, and you need to decide this is where we're going to go, or we're going to fly, and this is where we stay, and this is how much money we want to spend, and that's kind of the conversations or the difficulty factor that we have, where we go and we work, and talk to nations and get agreement on things, and then we write it all down, and then there's a more formal kind of sign-off process that then in the end ensures that all 32 say yes to a proposal.
Wow.
And so that takes time, and that is something that it does not exist in the private industry. You do have a board of directors in many companies, and they kind of determine strategy and give you guardrails in terms of spending and how to do your job. But the level of approval and the level of consensus that's required at NATO for any of our decisions is really quite remarkable. That is a big difference.
Holy cow. And I'm just thinking about, because when these nations come together, you're dealing with the president, prime minister, chancellors, all these different kinds of entities that lead these nations, correct? That are
Yes.
making decisions?
Yes and no. So what you refer to at the heads of state level, that is really the council, but at level of heads of state. And that typically meets one time a year, and that is at the summit. Now, we also have the same 32 nations get together in a ministerial formation. For example, defense ministers or foreign ministers of the 32 nations. But then every nation also has an ambassador at NATO, and around the ambassador is a delegation of policy specialists and finance people from that nation. So the big advantage is that if there is a need for the North Atlantic Council, which is really our highest governing body, to meet, they can meet in ambassadorial formation very quickly, because all these 32 ambassadors are sitting under our roof. So they have offices, and the delegations are sitting with them. So we can meet and discuss things and coordinate very, very quickly. And then
That's
underneath the North Atlantic Council in ambassadorial formation, we have these committees and these boards, and there are finance specialists from all 32 nations that sit on the, for example, on the budget committee. And we've got cybersecurity specialists of 32 nations that sit on the cyber defense committee, as an example. And so really the conversations and the policy making is going on with the cybersecurity specialists or with the budget specialists, right, in those respective committees. It's not that it goes immediately up to the president, right? That is really a one time a year big meeting where a lot of things are being prepared, and then it's just the final approval of a particular policy or paper.
And like yourself, in your case, you have a 6-year mandate as the CIO. Do a lot of these other board members also have the same time frame?
So the board members, remember, they work for the nations.
Yeah.
So board and committee members, they're really employees of the U.S. Department of Defense, as an example, or the U.S. State Department. And their employment practices and conditions and remuneration, all of that is really done by the respective country. So it's very hard to compare. So I don't work for a nation. I work for the international staff in Brussels. So I'm hired kind of locally by the international staff. And so the way it works is that the majority of contracts are for particular time periods. And in my case, it is a 3+3. So I got a 3-year contract that has an end date on it. And then there is the possibility to renew if both parties agree. And the renewal could be up to 3 more years. So I have just completed my first 3 years. I'm now in my second mandate, 1 month into it. And so my
Congrats.
thank you. And so my expiration date that's stamped on my head is really August 31st, 2027. So that's when my second mandate expires. And unless there is kind of an excruciating circumstance where something, it could be renewed, but that's typically does not happen. And so at that point in time, I would have to either apply for another job at NATO. But once you're the CIO, I don't, like right now, I don't know that there would be another job that I would like,
You're
or
the
you leave.
highest position.
Yeah, so in IT, certainly. And so I am planning to leave when the time comes, right? And go back into private industry and just do something different.
Huh. Now, I find that very interesting that it's both parties could renew, and you talk about how could you renew then again? You said there's a possibility, but usually that never happens.
No. So the possibility is if there is a crisis or something really big, you could be asked to stay by the Secretary General. You could be asked to stay up to 1 more year, but that I don't foresee, such a crisis. And I mean, I'm in my life planning. I'm like at a point where, so August 2027, that's when we pull out the moving boxes and we put our stuff in there, and then it's time to go somewhere else.
And did you ever think this was a possibility for yourself? When you were first an apprentice, did you ever think you were going to get to this point?
No, absolutely not. And I don't even have to go back that far. I mean, when I applied at NATO, I thought I had no chance. And I was the one who was like the most shocked and surprised when I was offered the job. Again, it goes back to what we talked about all the way in the beginning, right? Of like, do not cut yourself short. Reach for things that are seemingly unattainable, and you might be surprised as to what happens. So I worked in Vancouver at that time. So it was 2020. It was the height of COVID. So we all worked from home. And I was on a really, really, really difficult project that has given me half of the gray hair that is now on his head. It was hard. So we divested a non-strategic part of our business and we sold it to a Chinese company. And so I was on the phone, like all hours of the night. And it was really difficult because none of them really spoke English, and it all had to go through interpreters, and it was a mess. And then one of these nights, I'm like, okay, I've been thinking about this for quite some time. I was 11 years at the company at that point, and I thought, okay, it is time to do something else. And so I went on LinkedIn and I did the search, and I looked for CIO, and I basically looked worldwide. I'm kind of like, well, North America, South America, Europe. Let's look. And then after looking a bit, I saw NATO Chief Information Officer on LinkedIn as a posting. And I remember thinking, it's like, yeah, what are the chances of me getting this job? 0. So, and then I thought, well, I'll apply. there's no chance I would get it, but I'll apply because I was curious to see how NATO does this application portal. Because you need to log onto
Hmm.
a portal, you need to create a user ID, and then they ask you all sorts of questions like in 200 words or less, explain why you would be the best person for this job.
Sounds
Or
like a
in
college application.
yeah, it's one of these applications. It's not just like apply now button on LinkedIn that you click. No, you really have to work for it. And so I went onto this portal and I started filling things out, and then I saved it. And then kind of the next day I went out there, just a bit of a, it was almost kind of a hobby where I thought, oh, this project that I was on is so hard. I need to relax a bit, half an hour before going to sleep, like very late at night after the last call with China. And so I did. I played with this application, and then a couple of days later, I hit the send button, and then I thought, well, that's that. I won't hear from them. And then to my complete surprise, they reached out to me a couple of weeks later and invited me to participate in the selection process. And then the selection process was really a number of tests and an interview and kind of like tests that NATO did, and an assessment center where you work with a whole bunch of psychologists that kind of look at you from all sorts of different angles and give you difficult things to do and have you do some role playing. I mean, it was a big production, and it took a very long time. And as I went through all of these steps, each time I thought, well, there's probably already an internal candidate that they have, because I had, again, as we've just determined, I have like no government experience. I have no public sector experience, no military. I'm like a private, HP Compact, Sierra Wireless kind of guy. And in the end, all the way to the final interview, I was convinced I was not going to get this job. They were going to pick someone who has these experiences and these skills internally. And I was the one who kind of fell off my office chair in my home office when I got the acceptance email.
I think that's absolutely amazing that you got to the position that you are today. And it goes to just show, literally, if you just put in a little bit of effort and you kind of continue with what your goals are, eventually you'll hit them. I mean, like, look for yourself. You didn't know much English when you first started at Compact. Then you had to learn some Spanish. Like, there's a lot of different things that you've worked very hard at to get to the position you are today. And I think that's awesome that you're here. I hope you have a great next 3 years as a CIO for NATO. And I wish you safe travels. And I really thank you for doing this episode today.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Let's not forget, hang in there and think positively and stretch into assignments. And before you know it, you've grown into them.
Thanks, Manfred.
Thanks.